You're a mum, you're a mum, you're a busy mum. Come listen to the Busy Mum podcast. Life hacks and inspiration for the busy modern mum.
Hi and welcome to the Busy Mum podcast. I am your host, Jackie DeCampo. This podcast's sole focus is to interview busy mums and sometimes dads that usually have a business or at the very least a bustling side hustle. We cover areas like why they got into business in the first place, what their greatest lessons are or fear is, and how to overcome that. We talk all things marketing, advertising, systems, processes, cash flow, which is my favorite part, whether they have a product-based business or a service-based business, and all things related to business. And also, we talk about how they manage it with a family life as well. A little bit about me. I'm 38 years old, married to Ben DeCampo. We have 2 daughters. I am a co-founder of Milkman Grooming Co. I host this podcast and I am a mad keen gardener. If you want to share your story, please reach out, or if you're interested in sponsoring an episode, again, please reach out. My packages are very reasonable. My email is thebusymumpodcast, that's M-U-M, podcast@gmail.com. Now let's dive into this bloody fantastic episode. Olivia, welcome to the Busy Mum podcast. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Thank you so much. We were just discussing off air before how we met, and we think it's from like-minded bitches drinking wine. So I want to do a little shout out to Jane Liu, I think it is, who started that. So thank you so much, Jane. I've met quite a few lovely people from that. I think it's a page, isn't it? Is it a group or a page?
Oh, I think it's both.
Yeah. So I think it's a group actually. Anyway, it doesn't matter what it is what it is, and there is almost 100,000 people on that page. So thank you. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Olivia. What's your business? What do you specialize? How do people contact you? And how did you get started?
So a little bit about me. I just recently moved to Melbourne, Australia, which is a pretty big deal with my husband. We're here as permanent residents, which is pretty crazy still thinking about it. And then I kind of started I think a lot of people did. I was in the corporate world, had a 9 to 5, an 8 to 6 job. I know a lot of people say 9 to 5. Mine was 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. and I do not forget that. And I was working at Bloomberg because I did a bachelor's in business, and I just kind of thought I would be in the corporate world, to be honest, forever. I think a lot of people who set out to do that, to get a job and stuff, they kind of think that's going to be their life. And then kind of the first year and a half was really hate-love relationship. I loved how challenging and intense it was. But then, I think any entrepreneur will understand this, and any person who's really, really focused on purpose and fulfillment. For me, it was I just really didn't feel like I was doing anything of substance. I didn't feel like I was doing something to have an effect on human beings. And it's funny how when you're 22, that's when I started the job, you don't really think about that, because I don't think it's something you've ever had to really think about. And then when you're in the job and you're working there every day, Monday through Friday, I just felt wasted. My life and time was being kind of wasted. And obviously life is perception. So for me, that was just the meaning and the interpretation that I had put on that job, but that's kind of how I felt. And so I kind of started discovering other things, and I quit that job, did a master's in organizational psychology and psychiatry, did a coaching qualification, did an NLP program, and then started a small sort of hobby business, which was a dating events business for global nomads, which people are always really surprised about now. I still get random messages once in a while for that, because it was something that people really wanted. And then I was like, oh, I'm sorry, guys, I'm not actually doing that anymore. But basically it was because I grew up very multiculturally and moving around so much, I found that there were a lot of people like me, I started discovering. And it felt because of all the moving, and especially different countries and different continents, it meant that we kind of felt we didn't really fit in with I'm French, so I fit in with French people, or I'm Australian, so I fit in. It felt we're kind of this weird mix, and we don't really fit in. And so I was cool, I'm going to create a dating platform for that, so other people can meet people like them, and it'll be great. So I did that for a little while, for 11 months, and it worked. It was very small. It was more of a hobby business. And then I started this coaching business because I realized that this is really my calling. So what I do now is I help female business owners basically drastically change their belief systems, their thinking, their patterns, their daily habits, even their action. And I help them create very different results to the results they have right now, but very focused on mindset, because that's the area that I find the most fascinating. And it's really where I find that it has the biggest like exponential growth. And I'm always interested in like quantum leaps. So yeah, now I do that. I help women, female business owners just really increase their level of results in business.
Okay. So I just want to step it back to that nomad dating business. Was that an app that you put together, or was it a website? Or
really good question. So basically, when I was doing this must have been, I think, about 4.5 years ago now. I think it would have been like when I first started it. And at the time, whereas now it's like starting apps is a lot more like people just do it. It's not really a big thing. It's become a lot cheaper as well. At the time, that was still a very expensive thing to do. Whereas building a website was more expensive than it is now, but it was still a lot cheaper. So in my head, I'd read like, I don't know if any of you guys have read like the book, The Lean Startup, or if you've read it, but I had like read a lot about this idea about like bootstrapping and like starting from scratch and not thinking too much about, you know, basically doing a lot of things in beta and trial and error before you kind of go to the next level. Because why spend loads of money when you don't even know if it's going to work? I had no idea. It was the first time I'd even started something. So I got a friend who I used to work with at Bloomberg, actually, who'd left the company to basically build me a website, and I obviously paid him. Oh my God, looking back. But anyway, that website we didn't get an app. Now it's so funny. A girl messaged me literally a few weeks ago saying, hey, I saw that you had this like, because I think there's still random stuff up online about me and like the dating website. And so she was like, I'm going to do an app. Like, I'd love your feedback or whatever. And I was like, sure. Like, I'm more than happy to like share. But it's so funny because, yeah, looking back, it was just like a quite basic sort of login website, kind of like Facebook, but much more basic, obviously.
Well, Facebook started quite basic as well.
Yeah,
so they just grew from there, and it just like people are very what's the word for it? Like, they're just very into themselves, and like that's what Facebook's all about, really. And Instagram's even that, but on steroids, isn't it? So
it is so true. That is literally what Facebook is about, because they're all about like, oh, it's about friendship and connection. But I mean, I don't know about anyone who really feels that way. Like, personally, I find a lot of my connection offline, not really online. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Although saying that, there's a lot of more like the smaller community groups. So like Like-Minded Bitches Drinking Wine is like too big. Like, that's just too big now, like to have that nice intimate feel. I think like those smaller groups with a couple of hundred in them that have really high interaction with each other, I think that's a good connection there. And I mean, I don't know what the tips and tricks of like that are to get that happening. I just think that you need like a core, I don't know, 100 people to start talking to each other online.
Yeah, you're so right, because I went to a like-minded event or like meetup. It was in Melbourne. I don't know if it was last week or the week before, and it was great because it was like less people, obviously, because it was like a small, and I think there were maybe 100 women, which is a lot, but it was really wonderful because I got to know people and like, you know, and so I think you're absolutely right. Like groups that have like anywhere over like even 10,000, it's just mega huge and you don't really connect on the same level. I mean, you can. I think it's that whole thing around you can use Facebook in any way that you so choose. I'm one of those people that I love to do online stuff and then ideally try to bring some stuff offline, like even if it's meeting people. Obviously, it's not always perfect, like because you don't live in the same city every time. And I think that's the power of Facebook is like you can meet people from all over. And I guess that's also really useful for business, but also life and yeah. And so now you're specializing in like mindset for coaching purposes and you're targeting female business owners. Why was the reason you did that? What was your why? So when I started almost 4 years ago now, I think it's a funny thing. It's like you don't really know what you're doing when you first begin, regardless of what that is, whether it's raising children or whether it's like starting a business or starting a job. Like you just like are like, I don't even know what I'm doing. So that's kind of how I felt. And I was coaching I think I was coaching women and men actually at the time. And I was just on anything. It could be dating, it could be body, fitness, like, because I had a coaching degree, like coaching qualification, and I had done NLP as well. Like I had the tools. So it didn't matter what the topic was. I was like, cool, I'm just going to use the tools, use the model, and then help these people get bigger results. And so I did that and it was great. I really genuinely enjoyed that. But the more I did it, I think after about 4 months, 5 months, I just realized that the women that I was working with, I just had a deeper connection from the get-go. Like the rapport was being built really fast. I was able to really get deep really, really quickly. And we just connected in a way that I just wasn't able to, I personally wasn't able to connect in the same way with the guys that I was coaching. And then I just sort of found that over and over again. And I got to a point where I was like, well, ultimately also my marketing right now is kind of targeting both men and women. And men and women, at least in my perspective, are very different. Like, sure, we're very similar in some ways, and so I was like, how cool would it be if I could just market to one gender? Because then I could really speak to them. I just felt like then I could also connect with them on a marketing level at a deeper level. So that was why I chose to work with women. And then business owners, I don't know why, but I have an absolute fascination for business, because in my eyes, it's like there's nothing and you're creating something from nothing. And I know that seems so basic. It's like, oh, yeah, great. But for me, it's like that. There's something just really cool about that. Like there was nothing, and all of a sudden you've got this, this organization, you've got employees, you've got like clients, you're solving problems, you've got a product or a service. Like I was so fascinated by that world. And also I tended to find that the women that I was working, because I was working with all kinds of different women, and all the women who I was working with who were entrepreneurs had this like very driven, hungry, like, I want to get this done. And for me, that was really appealing. And I just enjoyed my coaching calls more with them. Okay. So I just started like niching down, I think, down that arena, just because it felt like it was more suited to me. Plus I have a bachelor's in business. I'd run the other business before. Like I felt like I had built up enough. I'd created clients in my coaching business as well by then. And I was just more fascinated by it, to be honest.
Okay. Now, you mentioned NLP quite a few times. For my audience, can you just tell us a little bit about what it actually is, and like maybe even give us a couple of tips on how to use NLP, like for the people that are listening?
Yeah. So to be honest with you, so this was like when I did my training, it was probably about 4.5 years ago now. So, and I'd say that I've kind of leaned more towards coaching since then, and I'll share why that is. But basically, the NLP, so it's neuro-linguistics programming. And from what my perception and my interpretation of it, or what I've taken from it since then, is it's really about looking at language and looking at your thinking and your communication, but everything that you say to yourself and everything that you say in the real world. So it's a communication in your own mind and also communication with the rest of the world. And also how we basically hold images, colors, emotions, all of that about different topics. So for example, like if they do NLP for people who have a phobia. So if you have like a real intense fear of like snakes, for example, when there's an NLP technique that exists whereby you can, you get somebody to imagine the thing. So maybe it's a snake, and they have an image in their mind, and you tell them, okay, cool. Is that image really bright or is it really dark? And they're like, it's really bright. Is it really big or is it really small? It's really big, and it feels like it's right here in my face. Cool. So it's really big. Are the colors really vivid, or is it quite like faded out? Oh, the colors are vivid. Are there any noises going on? So you basically ask them these series of questions. And so you're getting a feel for the image that they have in their mind. Then what you do is you play with them, almost like you had like a dial, and you dial it down. So you're like, okay, try this for me. Like, can you make the image a little bit darker? Because right now you said it's really bright. Can you make it a little darker? And they're like, yeah, okay, I'll try that. And they make it darker. Cool. Can you make the image a little bit blurry? Right now it's super vivid and like detailed. Make it a bit blurry. And they do that. And you keep dialing down the different things. And what tends to happen, they've done this on me, because when I did the NLP training, you have to obviously be like, there are different exercises, and it is crazy how much your emotion can change just using those little, because that's a technique, using those little dials. And I've done that for myself. Like I've done that for goals. So for example, I used to have like a big business goal. I think at the time it was to make 6 figures. And I remember somebody had done it on me, and they were like, cool, so picture the goal. And I pictured it, and I was like, oh, like it feels so far away. Plus it feels so massive. And they got me to like make the goal really, really small. They also made me bring it really, really close to me so that I could almost like touch it, or even that I was like looking down upon it. And then they were like, oh, there's so many techniques and tools that you can use, but it was incredible how all of a sudden it didn't feel that big anymore. And it felt like I can actually do this, and it is possible, and I can achieve this, which to some people who've never done NLP or have never experienced NLP, it might seem like really you're going to dial down an image in your head and that's going to have an effect. But one, I did hit 6 figures. And two, it's funny because when you change your belief systems and your emotions and your feelings about something, it can drastically change the way you approach it, the way you take action, the way you think about something, and things that seemed impossible before all of a sudden feel possible. So everything changes in terms of your behavior, your thinking, your beliefs, and that can affect the results that you're getting. So yeah.
That's pretty cool. That was pretty cool.
I was like, wow.
Oh, is that similar to like hypnosis as well, or is hypnosis something totally different again?
So hypnosis, it's so funny because somebody had asked that when they were doing the NLP, because somebody was like, well, so what's a hypnosis? And so from what I've understood with hypnosis, so just like you would be telling yourself affirmations, like I think most of your listeners might have heard of like an affirmation. So saying something like, I am smart enough, I'm pretty, I can do this, I'm successful, whatever it might be, right? Whereas when you do affirmations, you're doing them yourself. Mm-hmm. With hypnosis, it's somebody else doing it to you. So usually what tends to happen is they get into a really calm, meditative state so that you're getting into almost different brain waves, right? Kind of like when you do meditation and you tap into a different, if you're able to do it through brain waves. And what tends to happen is then when somebody else is saying that affirmation to you, it would be basically sinking in deeper into your subconscious mind, because we've got 2 parts of our brain, the conscious brain and the non-conscious brain. Non-conscious controls 96 to 98% of your behavior perception. And that's where a lot of your beliefs and your habitual behavior exists, or like kind of lies. Mm-hmm. And so they basically believe that if in a hypnosis state, because you're not having to focus and you can be in your meditative state, since somebody else is telling you these things, it's supposedly sinking deeper into your subconscious mind, which is where all of those things really reside. So that's how it's a little bit different, but it's also fascinating. I haven't actually had that happen to me. I've never gotten hypnosis. I don't know if you have.
No, I haven't. I'm too scared to. Like, there's this little fear, like, I don't want to run around like a chicken. Like, that's, always embedded in there. It's like, what crazy stuff are they going to do to my brain? And I don't, one brain stuff is really scary because it's like, sometimes once it's changed, it won't go back to being how it was before. So I'm very cautious when it comes to that kind of stuff. But, other areas I'm not so cautious. So in your business, in your coaching business now, what apps are you using?
So, I was thinking about this before our podcast, and I was thinking, I would say that because I'm definitely more of the visionary and the founder, whereas like my team have been people who've been like, cool, like let's bring this in, let's bring in Trello and Asana, and like I'm one of those people where I've just never been really into systems and apps and things like that. So that's just particularly, I'd rather be client facing or be just basically building the ideas and that kind of thing. But I would say that just the basic apps that Facebook Messenger, the Facebook app, my team, for example, they were obsessed with Asana. I'm not a big fan. I just don't really like all of a sudden I feel really restricted when I see things like that. I know they're meant to be great because you can schedule things in, you can check about ideas. And I've heard great things. Like, obviously I had to use it when my team was like, cool, like we're using this. But I've got to say that I'm not probably like the biggest apps person. Like, I'm so much more like, I'll have all these ideas, I'll go and execute massively. But then if there's more like systems and processes to be put in place, then I get mostly other people to do that, just because it's not my forte or my like strong interest.
Yeah, because we in our business, we don't have any like system like that to manage everyone's workflow, but I know we need to. I'm like,
you need a person who loves that stuff.
Yeah, I know we do. And I think as an entrepreneur, you don't want to put it into your business, because then that reminds you of like your past life, having a job and having to be accountable, even though like you're subconsciously accountable anyway, but having to do that, you kind of go, oh, I don't really want to do that. You shake it off a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's exactly what you just said. And I think I was really grateful that one of the girls who I don't work with anymore, unfortunately, because like I moved or whatever, but like she was incredible because she was like, she loved it. Some people love those things. And so it was really great because she was passionate about it and passionate enough to sell it to me, like sell the, the use of it. And so, but no, I'm like you. I think that's, I remember going to Business Mastery with Tony Robbins 2 years ago or something in Las Vegas. And he said, it's quite normal. Like, obviously this is all of our belief systems, but it's quite normal to have like, different people. Like if you're really the visionary, then it's quite normal if that's not necessarily like your jam, and that's okay as well. But then you do need to like make sure you're filling in the gaps in, your other team members or,
So you mentioned just then you went to that Tony Robbins Business Mastery. Can't say that word very well. What's that like? Because on many occasions I've thought, oh, maybe I could do that. It's like $4,000 or $5,000 for like the 2 or 3 day course. But what is it like? Is there value in that? Honestly, do you see him the whole day, or do you just get him at 10 o'clock at night after you've been there for 10 hours? Like, what's the experience?
Yeah, and it's so funny because I wish I had known that, like the real kind of behind the scenes, because I feel like these things, especially big events like Tony Robbins events, but it could be any big event that, some of your listeners have been to or heard about. I think it's really hard to know what actually happens. Surprisingly, with Tony Robbins, I've actually usually been if it's his actual event, if he's speaking at an event, that's different. But
I know.
If it's really, those are rubbish. I tend to find that those are awful, but, or at least the few that I've been to. But with him, actually, so the Business Mastery event, it was 5 days. It was in Las Vegas. We were kind of recommended to stay at the hotel that the event was happening at, which was actually really good just in terms of like sleep and like whatever. We usually started, if I remember correctly, around like 9:30 a.m. We'd finish late, like 11, midnight, whatever. That sometimes I'm one of the, because sleep for me is like number one, really important. So sometimes I'd leave at like 10 or 9:30. I'd be like, cool, I'm done, because I just felt like I'm complete and I'll whatever. But so he was really the one teaching, I would say 70%, 80% of the time. Like he really did long, big days. He did do it. Like there were a few people, but the people he took on were really good as well. Cause I think sometimes, you go to events and the other person, whoever, is just genuinely not as good, or you kind of looked forward to the other guy. I am actually always impressed by who he chooses, cause they're incredibly charismatic. They know what they're talking about. They're just really good. So he was doing most of the event, I would say, like I said, like 70%, maybe a little bit more than that. And then it's like, imagine getting, it's like a business course that you could do over a 12-month period, kind of like an MBA or whatever. I haven't personally done an MBA, but I can assume, because I've done a bachelor's and I knew what an MBA would like kind of look like if some of my friends have done it, but it's doing it in a 5-day period of time. And Tony Robbins is all about like immersion, and like, because he believes that that's the real way to learn, and that's the way that you really change and shift. I think looking back, first of all, I'm really grateful I went. It was definitely the right decision at the time. But for me personally, I think it would have been better if, for example, it had been a 1-day event 5 times throughout the year, rather than a 5-day event once that year, because it meant that there was just so much to take on board, so much information. And so when you get back, and I execute, and I know you and I kind of spoke about before, like we like do. And I think, but even so, it's like, you're just not, I don't think you're getting the same level of like execution that you could if it was over a larger span of time. So I think, that's sort of like my take on it.
So you do get value. You get a lot of value. Yeah.
You get loads of value. I think then it's like, it's all about execution. Like you have to actually apply it to get the return out of it, but you definitely get the value. I would say like you really feel like you do. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what's my next question? Where do you go to get your business information, and why? So like you're constantly learning, I'm assuming, and wanting to grow your mind as well. So then you can pass on that knowledge to your clients. Where are you going for that?
Books. Like 99% of my time is spent in that. The reason for that is because I think somebody said this really well. I can't remember who it was, but they said like a book usually, especially if it's somebody that you've kind of Googled and done a lot of research around, if there's somebody who's quite qualified, then they've usually spent like, they've had, 40, 50 years worth of experience sometimes. Well, the books that I choose are usually people who've been in the industry for a long time, or who've been in business or mindset for a while. And now they've literally just regurgitated and like taken out everything that they've learned over those years, and you're getting a condensed version of it. Whereas like I'm really a big fan of like Facebook and YouTube, and there are some really great resources out there, and I've definitely used them. But I tend to find that can be a little bit hit or miss in terms of the fact that it could be people who are brand new. It could be people who don't actually have the results in that arena, but yet they're talking a lot about it. It feels like it can be a bit of a smattering. And so, whereas with books, I can like read all the reviews of books, I can Google the person and find out more about them. And usually if I then select specific people, I know that they've been doing this for a while, and and I can check out their sample and I can read it. And I just feel like I tend to get like a lot more out of it. I'm one of those people where if I read a book, I also like really apply everything from like the different chapters and stuff. I'm just like a big fan. I just like love it. I think it's like, I sometimes I can't believe those books are available to us for $10. It's like somebody who's like, that you would never normally be able to have a conversation with, because the guy is like, I don't know, a billionaire, multi-millionaire who's like not in your frame of like whatever.
Not in your space, yeah.
No. Yeah. And then you're like allowed to read his thoughts. Like when you think about how lucky we are to do that, it's kind of like insane. And it's like $8 or $12 or whatever, but it's like, I don't know. I think that's incredible.
And do you like have, say, top 3 books that like you just go, yeah, that book was like worth it, worth the $12?
Yeah. Okay. So Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins would be one of them. Inner Size by John Assaraf, which is a book about basically the brain science behind why things like mindset work works. And that I've read that already 4 times, and I'm just like obsessed, and I recommend it to everyone. So it's a great book, Inner Size. And also what I love about it is it teaches you why things work. I'm a really big fan of that kind of thing. Like he's actually spoken and worked with neuroscientists and figured out why the brain reacts the way it does, how the brain changes, how to change belief systems, how to get bigger results, etc. So that's a great book, Inner Size. And then there's so many. What would be my third recommendation if I guess I would probably say Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Dr. Joe Dispenza, because one, the guy is just super knowledgeable. He's done a PhD. He's very like, I guess, qualified and educated on that front, which is not everything, but it's always kind of nice to have as well. And then on top of that, he talks a lot about quantum physics and again, like the brain. And I find that so fascinating. And he links up basically the quantum physics and why you can create new results in your life or in your business, whatever it might be. And it's just fascinating. Like, I think if anyone reads that, they'll be like, I think they'll be convinced as well. Cause I think sometimes it takes a little bit of convincing. Like, why should I change my habits? Why should I change my belief systems? Why should I meditate or visualize? Or, there's a lot of, I think,
it's too woo-woo. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just an incredible book for that.
And last, long question, I suppose, and then we can go into the fun, quick questions. What's one area of your business you would like to improve and why? And how do you propose to do it?
Really, I love that question. So for me, I think it's always been kind of the same thing over the years. It's around the scaling with processes and systems. And so you're probably not really that surprised that I'm saying that, because I literally just said that that's an area of weakness, not an area of weakness, but it's an area that I definitely am like, cool, I want to give that over to someone else. But I think I've always been able to make sales. I've always been able to get clients, at least over the last 3 years. Obviously the first 6 months, 8 months was like, I have no idea what I'm doing and I have to learn. But after that, that was something that I found was like, okay, this makes sense. And because it's all about serving. And for me, that makes sense. Like, you just serve human beings, like, what could be better than that? But I think that once you've served people and you've solved a problem and they've given you money in exchange, that's one component. And I think the component that I didn't understand before is the idea around scaling that and what that actually requires. And personally, what I found is that it requires a different set of skills, a different set of strategies, a different kind of team. And so for me, it's really about how do I do that in a way that is still super authentic, in integrity and in alignment with who I am. Because sometimes, there's a lot of stuff out there around different funnels to be used, automation, advertising, things like that, that sometimes it feels like it's very not me, because I'm all about people really knowing the real me. And obviously my business is run off of, I'm kind of the forefront, just kind of like how Tony Robbins is the forefront of his coaching company. That's kind of how I am. So for me, it needs to be an integrity. And I think sometimes certain things that are done are just don't feel as aligned. So for me, it's been about learning what is the right aligned way for me to scale that. So you said like what would you propose to doing that? I think it's multiplying what I'm doing. So for example, sometimes with ads, for example, I've hired everyone out in terms of ads. I've hired ad strategists, digital marketing agencies. I've hired like specific teams. It's never really worked as well as we wanted them to. And I think it's because it needs to be more like basically expanding, maximizing what I'm currently doing. So for example, the fun kind of casual live streams, I do live streams Monday through Friday on Facebook, doing those, but then having those being expanded without necessarily doing the kind of very structured funnel system that they have on Facebook ads sometimes, where they're like, they give you a little PDF and then grab my guide. And I get why that works. And we've done it before and we've increased emails. And that's just one example. But for me, I found that then I don't attract the right types of people and I don't tend to get the right kinds of clients. So for me, that's like, well, why would I do that? I'm not here just to get money. For me, it's never been about that. For me, it's about really making change and making an impact on the people who really want to create change. So it's just still a learning process, to be honest, that part.
Okay. No, that's fine. Like, I always think you're at where you're at in business is because you haven't learned the next step to do the bigger thing. So yeah, that's
100%.
That's kind of my thinking. It's taken me a while to figure that out. Okay, so the fun quick questions are basically, what do you prefer and why? So the first one is vampire or werewolf?
Definitely, I think werewolf, just because animals.
Just animals. You don't want to drink blood for the rest of your life.
Exactly.
These are the conversations we usually have in the office, so that's why I thought I'll chuck them down here and just see how they go.
I think they're really good. They're great to get people. At least you get a different perspective, different angle.
Netflix or Stan?
Definitely Netflix.
Why? Just because the broader range? I just
love it. I think we started it and then I've been hooked ever since. I think they're really good at recommending things for me and I've never had an issue with their service. And I think when that's like, I'm a good client in that sense, like it's been so good and for so long that I'm like, I don't have any qualms about it.
Cool. Yeah. And product-based business or service-based business?
Definitely service-based.
Why? Is that because you don't have to deal with product?
Yeah. No, because I have a bit of an obsession with, I love people and I'm fascinated about human behavior. And I think that service forces you to have to deal with that on a whole other level because it's usually a bit longer term where it requires like that person.
Yeah.
And I think that's just really interesting to me. That's why.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Olivia, for being on the Busy Mum podcast. This has been really entertaining and educational for me, so I hope also for other people that are listening. And you're definitely an expert in that area, I must say. So thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of the Busy Mum podcast. Don't forget to let your friends know and also subscribe to the iTunes channel. And also my socials if you want to see what I'm getting up to. A brand new episode is out every Monday morning, just like clockwork.